So I'm an accountant, I'm a business consultant. I am also a tax strategist, and I've been in the finance industry for over 18 years. As a solopreneur, right, or someone who's an entrepreneur, hello, Five Family. Welcome to another episode of the Tax Takeover. I'm excited about this episode because I have a special guest, and I know that I warmed you up a little bit with our talks about how to transfer your assets to your family members, right, in a tax advantageous way. So I wanted to have a guest on that specializes in what we call estate planning. So tonight we're going to be talking about the power of estate planning. And so I brought on attorney Shannon Wilson, and she's going to be the subject matter expert for tonight. So I want you to get your pens, get your paper ready, because you're going to have a lot of information, good content to take notes down. And make sure that you also drop your questions in the comment section, and we'll be sure to address those questions along the way. All right. So again, welcome to another episode of Tax Takeover. You already know what it's about. I am your host, Samara. For those who are joining us for the first time, I am your resident tax strategist for the duration of the show. And again, this is where we talk about all things tax planning, right? So we have a model here on the Tax Takeover. We don't just wait until we are wealthy to start tax planning, but rather use tax planning as a tool to build wealth, right? So that's why I come before you every week sharing these tips and strategies. Got tongue tied there. Sharing these tax tips and strategies so that you can do tax planning the right way, right? So as an enrolled agent with the Internal Revenue Service, we are deemed as the subject matter experts when it comes to the tax code. And so we leverage that tax code to help our clients tax plan and save more of their hard-earned money. That's what the tax takeover is all about, right? So without further ado, let's get this show started. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the power of estate planning. And since I am not an estate attorney, I thought that I would lean on a special guest to be the subject matter expert for tonight. So again, get out your pens and paper because you're definitely going to want to jot down a lot of the tidbits that I know Attorney Wilson is going to be sharing with us tonight. So let's welcome Attorney Wilson to the stage. Hello, how are you, Shannon?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so glad and so excited for you to be here. And the people are excited too. They were asking me questions last week, and I was like, that's not me. I'm going to have an attorney on the show. Y'all save y'all questions for her.
Right. That's why we work well together. We stay in our lanes.
That's it. I stay in my lane. Absolutely. So, before we move in and jump right into it, can you please introduce yourself to the Five Finance family?
Sure. My name is Shannon Wilson, and I am an estate planning attorney here in the Metro Atlanta area. I help individuals enhance their communities, enhance their families by providing them with custom estate planning.
I love it. And funny story, Five Finance family, how we met is I have a client, and Shannon was introduced to me through one of our clients, right? So we have a mutual client that we
Mutual.
share. Right. So absolutely, I stay in my lane. That's why you are here, Shannon. And the people want to understand what estate planning is. So if you can please explain to us what estate planning is and why it is important.
Absolutely. So basically, estate planning is like chess. I don't play chess, but I do know that it's a game of strategy. And in order to plan, you have to be strategic about it. There's a phrase I love to say: when you neglect to plan, you plan to neglect. So
Mm.
when we engage in estate planning, we are planning to help those who we leave behind, help those who may have to pick up pieces when we're incapacitated. So it is planning for the possibility of becoming incapacitated and having all of the proper legal documents in place for that possibility, and then planning for the certainty of death and having all of the documents in place that go with what happens when a person passes away.
Mm. And I feel like for a lot of us, that's probably why we push it off, right? Nobody wants to think about like planning for you're deaf. There's no way to.
It's going to happen to all of us. Just
It's
none of us know the day nor the hour. But you're
right.
right. Many people are ultra superstitious, and they
Mhm.
think if I start planning today, I'm going to die tomorrow.
Right, exactly. So we are here to debunk that myth, y'all. Okay. So I'm glad that you were able to explain to us like what it is and why it's important. So could you elaborate a little bit on some of the tools or some of the strategies that you use when you are estate planning?
Absolutely. So part of it depends on age. And when I say age, that is because everyone, I do mean everyone, from the time they turn 18 should have some semblance of an estate plan in place. Why? Because 18 is the operative age where mom, dad, guardian can no longer speak for you, can no longer manage your finances, can no longer speak for you medically. They really legally no longer can represent you unless you give them the authority to do so. The only way
Mm.
to do that is via the documents that go into estate planning.
Oh, wow.
So it varies from, an 18-year-old is going to have one set of circumstances and assets. A 30 something year old is going to have another set. That 60, 70 person is going to have another set. And so it is something that adapts with you. It changes with you. It can be edited over the course of time as long as you are of sound mind. And it often is, right? We go through different ages and stages in life, and your state plan should be convertible with you through those ages and stages.
Now, see, that's a key word, right? Convertible.
Mhm.
So, the estate planning itself you can change, but are there some tools that you use that may not be able to change with you? And is that important to understand when you're doing your estate planning?
Yeah. So the tools that go into estate planning are the documents themselves.
Right.
Right? And as long as those documents, when they're put in place, they are going to have a regular semblance of you.
Okay.
But the editing of those documents over the course of time is what will edit and change, right?
Okay.
I tell people all the time, estate planning is not a one and done thing.
Okay. Good to
It's a
know.
process.
Right.
It is a process. So
Right.
18-year-old me has nothing, but I
Right.
know if something happens to me, mom and dad have to be able to speak for me. So my documents are going to look one way,
Right.
right? 25-year-old me who may be a newlywed has documents, the same documents, but now they've been adjusted a little bit because there's another person to account for, or there's another entity, right?
Right.
38-year-old me that's had three jobs and have built assets may have a whole different plan in place, but the base documents will already be there. I just will be editing and updating them as I transition through life.
Gotcha. And so some of those documents, for instance, things like a trust, right? I'm assuming can be a part of estate planning. What about like wills or life insurance? Are any of those documents included in estate planning?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
the three main documents that everyone should have are one, a power of attorney.
Okay.
And the power of attorney is the document that allows you to say, if something happens to me and I become incapacitated or I'm not available, this is who speaks for me financially and legally,
Okay.
right? The second document that everybody should have in their estate plan from the time they turn 18 is a healthcare document. And this is usually a 3 or 4 part document that allows you to say, if something happens to me and I cannot speak for myself uh, physically or medically, this is who speaks for me, and this is how I would speak for myself if I were able to. Things like, I want to do not resuscitate, or
Oh,
no blood transfusions for me. Things like that go into that document.
okay.
The third document that everybody should have in place is a last will and testament. Most people call this a will, right? And this is the document that gives you the opportunity to say publicly, this is what all I have, and this is what I want to happen with everything that I have while I'm living. So that's the document when a person dies that the state basically is looking for to see, okay, what happens with the car, and what happens with all the shoes and the clothes and the handbags, and what happens with the artwork, and oh, what happens with that real property, which is houses and land, and
Right.
what happens with that business, right? Estate planning takes on a whole other animal when somebody is a business owner. And so all of that goes in the will.
Wow.
Now, for some people, they have assets that need to be protected and can only be properly transferred outside of a will via another tool that doesn't apply to everyone. Everyone doesn't need this, but some people also need a trust.
Mm-hmm.
All
Mm-hmm.
right. And so you should never have a trust with no will. But
Okay.
you can have a will with no trust, right? So the three documents I just said, the power of attorney, the healthcare, and the will are the three main documents. But some people also can benefit from the beauty and the planning tools associated with the trust.
So I'm glad you mentioned the trust because that is something that I'm passionate about because of the tax benefits that you get with establishing a trust, right? Because
Right,
a trust is not taxed in the same way, y'all, as ordinary income, okay? And only the income that is earned in that trust, right, is what's going to be taxed, or when the distributions are made to the beneficiaries. But again, not in the same tax brackets as your ordinary income would be. So that's a little bit of tax planning for you, right? So I'm
right.
glad that you squeezed that in, Shannon, because that is the power of a trust. And I'm glad you're saying that you can have a will, right, without the trust. But if you had the trust, you might want to make sure you have the will.
Right. Because otherwise, you just have an expensive piece of paper that says you have a trust,
Right,
and probate will like
right.
come rushing in if you don't have the will. So the will is actually the main document in estate planning. The trust is, I like to think about it kind of like the icing on the cupcake.
Ah, that's good. That's good. So that's a way to look at it, everyone. All right. Your trust is your icing on the cupcake because it definitely has some sweet benefits.
It does. It does.
For
And like
sure.
I said, everyone doesn't like cupcakes.
Right.
Everyone doesn't need a trust.
That's just a fact. Now let's talk about, you mentioned something about probate, right?
Yeah.
So I know that I've heard horror stories, and I've even had clients come to me where we had to prepare the tax return for their estate, but they had probate like fees and stuff like that too that it had to pass through first because they didn't have things properly structured. So when you are estate planning, is that a way to like negate probate at some time, or like to eliminate how long the estate can get held up in probate? Does any of that happen through estate planning?
It does, and it can. So probate is an animal all by itself.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to do the estate planning end on the front so that people don't get held up and caught up in drug through everything that probate entails. Right? There is one way to do that, and that is to plan strategically. Remember, I said it's like chess. It's a game of strategy. And one strategy that many people implement, and validly so, is they have a trust-based estate plan. So they have
Mm-hmm.
the power of attorney for while they're living. They have the health care for while they're living. Then they have the will for once they pass away. But the will, instead of outlining everything that they have in the will for the whole world to see, because the will is a public document once somebody passes away, and it is in probate, right? And probate is the court, by the way.
Right.
Uh, Instead of outlining that for the whole world to see, because most people live their lives privately while they're living, now the will simply says, I leave everything in my trust. So
Mm.
when that will gets to probate court, all they see is that you have a trust, but they don't know what all you have. They don't know what assets are there,
Love
and they
that.
don't know what's in the trust. The trust is a private document, a private tool that you can distribute everything in a ways that you cannot do in just a will.
Now that is key, right? So I hope y'all heard that. So there is importance in having a trust. And Shannon, you help do that process too, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
perfect, y'all. All right, cool. So hope y'all taking notes. All right, Shannon.
Mhm.
So another follow-up question: when meeting with a potential client, right? Like, how do you determine which documents need to be used? What's going to be most beneficial for that client?
Yeah. So basically, I look at the client as a whole. I
Mm-hmm.
look at their goals. I look at their family structure. I look at what assets they have. I look at their future. Are you planning on building assets? Are you comfortable where you are? Are you an 18-year-old and you've got a lot of life ahead of you? Are you 78 years old and about to check into uh, personal care facility? What does it look like?
Right.
All right. And so once we have that good snapshot, then I tell people all the time it's kind of like a puzzle, right? Everybody has in their minds an image of what they want their legacy to look like.
Right.
But everybody also has 500 pieces in their life's puzzle.
Hmm.
They may not know how to take those 500 pieces and put them together in a plan so that that legacy image can come to life.
Right.
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 So we think about estate planning is not for necessarily death, but it's also for life, especially the lives of those that we leave behind in
Hmm.
passing. And so I look at the client, I look at all of that, and then we talk about, okay, well, do they really need a trust?
Mm.
There's some categories of people that do need a trust, but others can will be sufficient with the will, the power of attorney, and the healthcare document. So, Samara, what are those? Who are those people that would benefit from a trust?
Yeah.
I have four categories.
All right.
Right. The first is anyone who owns a business. Business owners should have a trust in
That's
place
right.
because then we can do what's called business succession planning, and you can say what happens with that business upon my passing.
That's right.
Right? Especially because you're in the business and you have alignment with the Secretary of State's office or
That's
maybe
right.
some business partners or whatever that looks like. So your estate plan should consider that and make sure all of those documents align. So business owners should absolutely have a trust in addition to the other three documents.
Right.
Um, Anyone who has real property, which is houses and land, whether it has a mortgage on it or not, should also have a trust. Why? Because real property, especially here in Georgia, real property cannot transfer outside of probate unless you do it in a manner that is, let's just say, less than above board,
Hmm.
right? And so the only way to do that is to transfer it ahead of time. And so most people, the benefit of having that trust is now you can put the trust name on that deed and that real property doesn't have to go through probate.
Mm. Good.
And you can dictate and you can plan strategically what you want that property to look like 2, 3, 12 generations from now.
Right.
The third category of people that should always have a trust are those who have assets that they want to protect, transfer, and or create some sort of generational wealth with.
Mm.
And
Okay.
when I say generational wealth, I'm not talking about, it doesn't have to be millions, billions, and trillions.
Right.
It can be pennies, quarters, and dollars,
Mm.
right? But as long as you transfer assets into a trust or make the trust the beneficiary on assets that you have in place, like, for instance, you mentioned life insurance,
Hmm.
right? Life insurance is something that you can have in place outside of probate and you name a beneficiary.
Right.
But what happens when that beneficiary that you named dies before you? Now you may have been grief stricken and forget to change that beneficiary, and it would have been for nothing. So instead, what we do is we make the trust the beneficiary. And then you say in the trust, pay for my funeral, pay
Right.
for my house, and then split the rest between my 12 grandchildren. Whatever you want to do,
Right.
you put that in the trust document.
Right.
So again, business owners always need a trust. Real property owners, whether it has a mortgage or not, need a trust. The third category was anyone who has assets that they want to distribute in a creative and maybe generational building manner. The fourth category of people I always recommend a trust for is three parts. The first is anyone with minor children.
Mm.
Plan for minor children, right? We Nobody wants to think about passing away while we have minors. However, again, it's
Exactly.
strategic in planning for them. When you neglect to plan, you plan to neglect.
Right.
So anyone with minor children should have a trust. Anyone in a blended family should have a trust. Blended families these days are more traditional than traditional families. And that comes with it a whole other level of planning that has to be taken into consideration.
Mm.
And then the third category of people in that fourth prong is, quite frankly, anyone with an interest in leaving a legacy.
Mm. I love it. I love it. And I'm glad that you mentioned that about like who benefits from the trust, right? Because my small business owners, I know y'all are out there, okay? Like this is where some of us fail, right? Because we build these amazing businesses, and then if we die, they die with us, right? And it could be a very lucrative business that could have been passed on to somebody else, but it just stops with you. And this especially was the case during COVID, right? So unfortunately, I inherited some clients because their accountant passed away, right? And the business just died with the accountant. So it's unfortunate, right? Because there could have been somebody in the family that could have ran that business. That business probably still had assets, right? That business probably
Right,
still had a
right.
way of making income still. But again, if you don't have things structured properly, that's where it ends. Your legacy ends. You don't leave a legacy. So I'm so glad that you use those keywords about legacy. I'm so glad that you said, hey, you don't have to be a millionaire to think that you need a trust. Like, these are the assets that you have in place. So protect your assets. That's what it sounds like it's about, right? It's about
Yes,
protecting that asset, right? And
absolutely.
your business is not your baby, y'all. It's an asset. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And the people often forget about the fact that yeah, that business can be passed on. It can live on, and it's especially critical for people who are in professional industries that require some sort of licensing, like accountants
Mm-hmm.
and like
Mm-hmm.
attorneys and like real estate professionals and like insurance professionals. All of those things come with it licensing that has to be in place for that business to move on. So have that succession plan in place.
Love it.
It allows you to say, if something happens to me, this is who takes over my business, and this is how it will continue.
I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Shannon. Well,
Yeah.
great. So then, when should someone consider hiring an estate attorney? Now, I remember you saying like your 18-year-old self versus your 24-year-old self. So when should someone consider hiring an estate attorney, and what are some of the risks of like not hiring? If you can just recap that for us again.
Yeah. So I always caution people, please do not let Google be your guide. Why? Because, yeah, there's some fantastic information out there in the World Wide Web, but it's not always valid. Please don't watch a TikTok and think that you have it all figured out,
Mhm.
right? You get what you pay for,
That's
one.
right.
And two, go with somebody who has the information and knows how all of these documents I just talked about, they work together,
Right.
right? And you should know they are legal documents, so there are ramifications to not having them incorrect in
Right.
place correctly.
Right.
So hire a professional who knows what they're doing and knows the ins and outs of the documents, gets to know you and your ins and outs so that your documents can match your life, can
Yep.
facilitate your plan.
Right.
And
I
so,
love it.
and it's not just attorneys, right? I think everyone should have a team in place.
I love
Samara and
it.
I have talked about this. That team should be an estate planning attorney, an accountant, maybe an insurance professional, a financial advisor, because it's always our team's job to get you to your destination safely,
Yep.
right? And when the team is working together collectively for your benefit, yeah, who doesn't want to have a team,
That
right?
part. Hmm.
Especially one that's working for you and your benefit and the legacy that you want to leave behind.
No, and that's especially important to Five Family. I hope y'all listened, right? So just like people come to me all the time about things that I am not the subject matter expert in, right? But having a team in place, like I try to connect them with the people that I know are experts because I know that these people are rock stars in their field and they're going to do things above board, right? Nothing will be done questionably. So you have to make sure that you have what we call these power players. One of my business besties says she has these power players in her life. And so that's what it is. Like your team is your power player, and you're going to have people in respective areas, and they all should work together. They all should be on the same page, right?
Right.
Just like when Shannon sets up that trust in your estate plan, guess what? Then the accountant has to make sure that the taxes are filed for the trust, right? If any gains are earned in the trust, or if any distributions are made from the trust, guess what? We have to make sure that those beneficiaries are filing their taxes accordingly. So we all work together, y'all. But you have to have a conversation and you have to make sure that we are all on the same page. What I like to do, Shannon, is I usually have a call like with all of us on, like the attorney gets on the phone, I get on the phone, so that we all understand the part that each of us has to play.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah, I have attorney-client privilege, but for instance, you and I can get on. We talk about the if they have a irrevocable trust, especially because gets its own EIN number and it's a standalone
that's
entity,
right.
and they do have to file all those separate taxes. Which
That's
I'm not
right.
even going to pretend that I can talk about that. That's what you're for, right?
Right.
But we can talk about that part of it with the client so that they understand, they see that we understand collectively and have their interest in mind.
Yep, and I'm glad you said that because I had a client that asked me today, and I was like, "Yeah, you set up, you start doing some estate planning, you may create an entity that's gonna have to file a tax return." So I'm glad you mentioned that about the irrevocable trust because we had a question in last week's live, and he was asking what was the difference between an irrevocable trust and a living trust, and which one was better.
Okay, so an irrevocable trust can be a living trust.
Oh, okay.
But a revocable trust can also be a living trust.
Okay.
So the buzz right now is everybody's talking about revocable living trusts,
Okay.
right? That is the type of trust that has the most flexibility. It's still connected to your name, your social, so it doesn't file its own separate return. It has the most flexibility with regard to moving and changing assets in and out of it. Um, it has the most flexibility with regard to you don't necessarily have to name specific beneficiaries up front,
Mm,
and you still maintain control of the assets, especially monetary assets that are in that trust. I don't rename assets in the name of trust. I prefer to have clients make the trust the beneficiary because renaming things and retitling things brings with it too many tax consequences.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
And
Facts.
so we make the trust the beneficiary instead. An irrevocable trust, on the other hand, is one that most people use for long term planning of assets that they own outright.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, that house that has no mortgage on it, that's been in the family for 4 generations, and you want it to stay in the family for 4 more generations, that can go in an irrevocable trust.
Right.
You relinquish your rights to controlling that property and you're putting that property in that irrevocable trust for future people or named beneficiaries
That's right.
to have the advantage of. You no longer are reaping the advantage of it.
Right.
An irrevocable trust also comes with it some protections, for instance, like Medicaid protection. And when people transfer their assets into that irrevocable trust and then 6 years later they apply for Medicaid, it looks like they don't have any assets because the irrevocable trust owns them.
Okay.
I said,
Okay.
I said, I said 6 years later because there's a 60-month or 5 year look back for Medicaid.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's why if you move them outside of that, then you're good. But
Right.
anything within, then the government's going to come back and make you pay those funds back or transfer them back because then it looks like you're hiding.
Right. Correct. Right.
Right. So an irrevocable trust comes with protections like that as far as Medicaid. But the main difference is irrevocable. You relinquish your rights to the assets and control of the assets, and it gets its own EIN number.
Right.
Any revenue or income that that irrevocable trust earns now has to, and I may be using the wrong terminology, Samara, but it has to pay, you have to pay taxes on it.
That is
It's
correct.
a tax return has to be filed on the trust behalf, not the individual.
That is correct. And so that's exactly, I'm so glad you broke that down in the differences because that's exactly what I was talking about early for Finance Family when I was saying that I had to file a tax return for a trust, right? And so it was an irrevocable trust that was created. The beneficiaries were already named. However, when property was sold, it was an old home that was sold. I think the mother had died. I'm not going to get into any of it. But, anyways, it was a property that was sold, right? And so, because the property was sold, there was a gain, y'all. It's a capital gain that the right that the trust earned. And so, according to the IRS, that trust has its own EIN number. It's sort of, think about it like a business, right? Like if you have an EIN number, you're going to be taxed on something. Think about your social security, right? Like that's like our EIN numbers. So that trust had to file a tax return, right? And so explaining to the client, oh yeah, I got to file a tax return. And then your trust has to pay taxes. And then what's left over, then that's what gets distributed to y'all.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so it's good that people understand the difference, and I know you're having conversations like that with your clients so that they are 100% aware of like what the implications are, what the responsibility is going to be that resides on who it's ever over the trust, who's managing it.
Hmm.
But yeah, I love conversations like this so that we can do a deep dive and so that people can really understand like what the different options are. Because when that came out, when he was like living versus irrevocable, I was like, ugh, I don't know. So I'm glad you were able to explain that to us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. And another part of that is you can be crafty in the planning portion,
Okay.
right? So, for instance, say that family, we'll just go with the family that you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, maybe it was the intent that the home never be sold and
Mm,
that it stay in the family forever, right?
mm-hmm.
Well, there would have been no tax implications associated with that.
Right.
Or there's also that capital gains in selling it within a certain amount of time
Mm-hmm.
after receiving it. Again, that's your lane, but I know
Mm-hmm.
it exists. So I
Right.
have those discussions with clients. Okay, is it your intent that this home never be sold, or do you want them to sell it right out of the gate? If you do, maybe not transferring it the way you want to do it is
Right.
the best way to do it. So absolutely, that's just another example of where the tax planning lane and the estate planning lane have to be working side by side.
That's right. That's the beauty of making sure your power players are all at the table at the same time so that we can have these conversations so that you as the taxpayer can be informed. Because that's what it's all about. Making sure you're making informed decisions. But this has been an amazing conversation, Shannon. I'm super, super
Yes.
stoked and super happy that you were able to come on and share your expertise, and just reiterate some of the things that we try to teach here on the Tax Takeover, just about being savvy taxpayers, right? And planning is the key, and I love your motto. We're going to make sure that we put that in the comment section.
When you neglect to plan, you plan to neglect.
There you go, y'all. There you go. So Shannon, please do us a favor and let us know like how we can connect with you. Are you on social media?
I am on social media,
Okay.
Legacy Legal ATL on Facebook and
Uh-huh.
on LinkedIn. And I also have a YouTube page.
Ah.
It's very
Oh,
minimal, but it is there. You can see some of my client testimonials on there and a couple of video snippets as well.
okay. And so if they want to connect with you personally, in order to do some estate planning, what are the next steps to do that?
So when people engage in conversations like this and watch videos like this, and I always like to offer a complimentary consultation.
Oh, love
So
it.
anyone watching this is entitled to a complimentary consultation. Contact me, let me know that you saw me on Samara's page, and I will absolutely set you up with that consultation. I can be emailed at Shannon, SHANNON, at legacylegalatl.com, or you can give me a call, 678-278-5463. Again, that's 678-278-5463.
I absolutely love it, y'all. And we shared that slide, and we'll be sure to make sure that we reshare that information again. Thank you so much, Shannon. This has been amazing. I hope you enjoyed it.
Did I always do? It's always my pleasure to divulge information because people just don't know what they don't know.
Correct. That is key. And knowledge is power, and especially if it's like good sound, right? Information. Cuz like you
Right.
said, it's a lot of people out here on TikTok, honey, just TikToking the lies all
Right. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, wait backstage for us, Shannon. I'm going to wrap things up and say goodbye, but I will join you in one moment. Okay?
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Bye bye. All right, Five Family. So there you have it. I know it's been a while since I had a guest on the show. So I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. Definitely, Shannon was able to share a lot of vital information for entrepreneurs and individuals as a whole, right? When we talk about estate planning, what it entails. Hopefully, she was able to answer some questions that we had from last week's show as well, right? And make sure, again, hopefully you put some questions in the comment because we were addressing them as they came up, but definitely thank y'all for tuning in for another episode of the Tax Takeover. Again, I want you to have a blessed and prosperous Tuesday evening, and until next time, happy tax planning.